Welcome to Tales from the Trails, navigating a proven path from content creation to distribution. We appreciate your time and hope to answer any questions you may have about creating and distributing your training content. I'm going to go ahead and get started. This is going to be a two-part hike today. The first leg will be led by myself, Park Ranger Joe. I'm not just a park ranger, though. I also work the support desk here at Rusty Software. I help all of our clients with the support of our products, as well as supporting any of their learning standard questions or needs. The second leg of our journey will be led by Park Ranger Andy. He also has a day job as one of our solutions consultants here at Rusty. As a reminder, we at Rusty Software are in the business of helping e-learning providers connect and play nicely together through both our products and knowledge of the standards. So what will we be talking about today? We're going to be really covering two parts of this. The first part, I will be talking about optimizing and creating your content for the standard you would like to use. And then I'm going to pass over to Andy to talk about some different ways you can distribute that content that you've created. We will talk about two specific tools that we have that would help. SCORM Cloud, which I'm going to touch on a little bit, and then Content Controller, which Andy will talk about. So by the end of the hour, not only will you have lots of hiking knowledge, but you will be able to select the right learning standard. We're going to talk some about what those learning standards will offer you. We're going to provide some directions and methods for sharing the content that you create, and we're going to talk about how to distribute or sell that content. Diving in, let's say you wanted to plan for a hike. What are the kinds of things that you need to be thinking about and considering? What's the weather going to be like that day? Should you actually be hiking? How long is the hike? Is this an actual hike that you can complete? If you're a beginner, then you might not want to go on a 10-mile hike uphill. Do you have the means to communicate with someone in an emergency if needed? Make sure you have ample water and maybe a snack or two, because you'll probably need some sort of energy. And lastly, you'll want to familiarize yourself with local wildlife. There could be dangerous stuff out there, who knows? The planning that goes along with creating your content can be very similar. You'll want to think about things like, is your content set up to report the data you're looking for? Things like status, score, time, interactions. You'll want to make sure you plan this part ahead of time, because that's going to be important when you're actually creating your content and messing around with your authoring tool, or really however you're creating that content. Do you have the means to share the content with your learners? So do you have a learning management system or a training delivery system? And on top of that, do those systems have a reliable player for the standard that you chose? Test your course. We always talk a ton about testing your course. We really, we end up using tools like SCORM Cloud to make sure the course sets all the things that you want it to, so that when you unveil that on your learners, you don't have your learners being your QA department. We find that generally tends to be a bad thing. Do you have a tool to create the content that you want to create? If you don't, there are tons of authoring tools out there that can do that job for you, or there are SCORM wrappers like Rusty Driver if you have developer resources that can help you wrap your existing content to talk SCORM, AICC, CMI5, XAPI, that sort of thing. And then lastly, course completions. You want to make sure that the learner understands what they need to do to complete the content, and is that content setting completion in a way your application understands. So what should you pack for your journey? For the hike itself, we'll want to pack things like boots and matches, just in case we need to set a fire, flashlights in case it gets dark or you get caught in the dark because maybe you got lost, Food and water, like we discussed, a cell phone, bug spray. I would probably also pack a map, but that's okay. But for your content, you should pack intent, compatibility, accessibility, bookmarking, exit options, and reporting. Now, to dig into what those concepts mean for your content, this is what we're getting at. Intent. So what is the purpose of your content? Is it properly conveyed? And is the reporting data that it is setting valid for that purpose? Compatibility. So what format or standards will you need to support? If it's multiple standards, do you have the means to easily do that? We have a few tools that can help that Andy will talk about here shortly. Accessibility. Where and how is your content consumed, as well as can all learners have an opportunity to take that training? For example, do you need a screen reader or anything that complies with the 508 compliance? Bookmarking. Can your learner leave at some point and maybe do their job, handle a customer, and then come back and continue where they left off? Over the years, we've heard from many a salty learner that have maybe taken an hour's worth of training, left because they had to do their job, come back, and they'd have to start over. And that's never fun to deal with. Exit options. We always push folks to provide their learners with a way to exit the content that isn't just closing the window. It's going to provide a clear way for not only the learner to leave, but also for the content to kind of unpack or really repack things, put all of its books back on the shelf, and run through its exit routine. This way, it is setting all the things that the LMS expects. So you're going to be hopefully getting everything that you're supposed to be reporting on. And it gets you around issues like lost completions, lost bookmarks. We have seen situations where race conditions can come up where the content closes slower than the player. And so the player closes and then the content is left open and has nowhere to push that runtime data to. So you lose a lot of reporting and end up with a lost completion type situation. In a mobile environment, it can prohibit a situation where the content gets left open, which leads you to a situation where if you're taking content on your mobile device and just set it down, the browser doesn't really close. If you're running SCORM 2004 content, that exit's really important for the roll-up of that information. And then reporting, that one's kind of obvious. Is the runtime data being efficiently reported, not only by the course, but also can your LMS report on that data? Choosing the right supplies. I know Chris on our team likes to talk about choosing the right tool in the toolbox. This is very much the same thing. You wouldn't want to wear a tuxedo on a hike in Colorado. You would want to wear the right gear. Standards are the same way. If you're looking for specific needs or you have specific reporting, specific standards may get you there. SCORM 1.2 is you're going to get the tried and true big four. So in most cases, completion status, success status, score, and time. It does have an idea of interactions being question and answer text. But if you're looking for a bit more, SCORM 2004 offers not only the big four, but also full question and answer text. So where SCORM 1.2 would only really give you an identifier. So question ID 1, answer A, I could get in SCORM 2004, why is the sky blue? Answer, because. XAPI can provide a really elegant way to deliver training outside of the LMS. So you put your content somewhere, point it directly at a learning record store, and you can deliver your content that way. XAPI can also be delivered via a tin can package in an LMS if the LMS supports it. CMI5 is a profile of XAPI that makes your XAPI course a little more at home in the learning management system, as it does have a packaging standard and some of the other, which XAPI did not have. Both XAPI and CMI5 have SCORM parity for the most part. So a lot of the things you can get in SCORM, you can get with those standards. The LTI standards, if you're into those, it's a connection standard that allows you to connect tools to providers and share larger curriculums. The higher ed folks are really into that. And then AICC is still around. We don't see it as much, but the big thing with AICC is it will support cross-domain communication natively. So that's a thing that you can do with that. Largely, the reporting data matches what SCORM 1.2 has. So, oops, sorry, went the wrong way. Optimizing your course for the best experience. So you chose your standard, you created your course. It's time for delivery. What do you want to do next? Really, the big thing is test. Before delivering your course to hundreds, thousands, maybe millions of people, you really want to make sure, once again, that they are not your QA department. You want them to get the best version of your training. And you will want to use tools like SCORM Cloud or other testing tools to get you there. But while you test, you're going to make sure it does all the things you want it to. Does it get the SCORM API in a way that the LMS understands? Does it behave as your chosen standard should? Are you getting the reporting? You want to give it a glance and make sure your learners have a path through the course that makes sense to them. So we talked a little bit about testing. And what I wanted to do is take a quick moment and share SCORM Cloud with you. Here in support, we talk to people every day about testing their content. We help people debug that content. And what I have done is set up a course that I have already completed in SCORM Cloud. It is one of our golf courses. Some of you may have seen them, but this is a SCORM 2004 third edition runtime advanced calls course. I know from the get-go that I have completed it, passed it. I got a 93, and I've spent a little bit of time in it. That's all well and good. The big four is great. You really should be getting that. But what I like to do is take a look at these debug logs. And this is another thing that some of you may not do all the time, but we do. So if you have questions about any of this information that we're going through now, or when you're testing your content in SCORM Cloud, you could reach out to us at support@rustacsoftware.com, and we're happy to kind of walk alongside you or hike alongside you. Stay with the theme. But I can take a look at things like objectives. If your course has set objectives, they're right there in the runtime data. Going a little bit further down, I see a progress measure. Progress measure is something that has been pretty popular lately. Lots of folks ask about it. What this means is it is the percentage of completion towards a content object. It is only available really in a reportable form in SCORM 2004 4th edition and CMI 5, but it's a neat piece of information to report on, not only for you, but also for your learners. If I scroll down just a little bit further, I can see things like location. Oops, yeah, there's the location. What the location is the bookmark. So at this point in the course, I was on the 5th page. It could be named to whatever you want. It could be the actual page name. It can be expressive, or it could just be something the course understands. Going a little bit further down, we get to the good stuff. And then we've got the interactions. So once again, the interactions are the questions and answer. And SCORM 2004 will support the entire full question and answer text, which is very neat. And I can see in here that in the description, here is the question that I was asked about the rules of golf. And I can also see my learner response, which is enumerated, but still I can see what they answered. And then scrolling all the way down, I believe it happens at the end. Actually, it happens, there we go. So I can see the score that I received. I received a 93. In this particular case, this is an interesting course in that it's going to set all of the interaction data later and then set the completion right before. So these are the types of things we will look for when troubleshooting content. And if you ever need help doing such a thing, please feel free to reach out to us, and we'd be happy to help. Do you have any questions? If you do, please feel free to pop them in the chat. We're going to try to get at them. If not, that's absolutely okay. We do have a little bit further to go, and Andy will be taking us further down the path. We'll give it a second or two and then probably pop on. Yeah, the Storm Cloud debug logs are the best. If there's anything e-learning folk get excited about, it's debug logs and troubleshooting. At least I do. I think it's great. Okay. Well, it doesn't sound like there's any questions so far. So I'm going to go ahead and pass things to Andy.
All right.
Momentarily.
Thanks, Joe.
There you go, Andy.
Great. Well, thanks to Joe for getting us to this point along our journey today. I'm going to be talking about kind of the last mile of the trip, and that's really around how you end up getting your content essentially into the hands of your learners. There's a few things to consider as you're determining the best way to distribute your content. The first one, as you can see here, is going to be who's your audience and how do they need to access it. That's an incredibly important piece of information for you to have, because that is a huge determining factor on potentially, if you have a choice, what the modality of that content is. Do you need to create it as a standards-based package? Would it be better from a modality perspective to be content on a website? Do you need or want to control access to the content? Meaning that, is there a need for you to turn off access at some point? That's another interesting thing to consider. You're considering how to put the content in front of the learners, or perhaps even sharing content with a customer. And as Joe mentioned with the standard selection, what are the kinds of reports that you're interested in? How you distribute content can have an impact on the amount of data that you receive or where you're able to access reporting. All right, so we're looking really at three primary ways to deliver content. Joe went through a lot of the standards-based approaches to content packaging. So when we're talking about packaged content, it is standards-based content. It is, SCORM, AICC, tin can packages, CMI5. So that is the kind of the default way that a lot of people think about, especially in the e-learning space, of creating their content. And we'll talk about, what that looks like from a delivery or distribution perspective. Direct delivery is another way of talking about non-standards based content. So the way that I think about direct delivery is that I've created a website. I have content in that website that is being dynamically managed by databases and server-side code and those types of things. It's not well suited to being packaged to a standard. So direct delivery is great for those types of activities or content that you want to make available to your learners. Content marketplaces are becoming, or have been, a big thing for a long time, and are continuing to be another way to get your content in front of, in this case, prospects, potential customers, but they're also going to help you through their distribution methodologies to get the content in front of the learners. And then the last thing on this list, at least for now, would be centralized or controlled distribution. This is the thing that we get the most excited about. It's the piece of the puzzle that we have really direct and useful solutions around. So we'll touch on a little bit of that here in just a bit. Okay, so for packaged content, we'll talk about when you might deliver just the packages themselves, and then we'll talk about some of the pitfalls or potential hazards as you'll potentially come across as you go down this particular trail. So going back to that initial idea of who is the audience and how do they need to access it, It probably is pretty obvious that if you are creating content for your own organization, for your own employees, and you have a learning management system that supports the standards that your packages conform to, then it is very easy to deliver that packaged content inside of that learning management system. That is probably the best way to deliver that packaged content. However, we have some folks that come to us that have packaged content that are being asked for that content to be accessible or launched from a third-party learning management system. And this is the easiest way to make that content available through that system. It doesn't require any additional technology. You can simply hand over the content to that customer or partner to be loaded into their LMS. But there are some potential pitfalls around just handing over the content in its entirety to that third-party system. You might want to control how much they can access that content. You might need to update the content on a pretty regular basis. And if you just have your content living out in the wild in its entirety inside of that SCORM package, let's say, it becomes a pretty arduous process for updating content, versioning content. You might have concerns about a customer or a partner taking your SCORM package or your tin can package and sharing it with somebody that you don't have a relationship with. So there's IP or intellectual property concerns that might come up in this particular way of distributing content. You're also cutting yourself off from any sort of access or automated access to utilization data about how learners are accessing your content or using the content. All of that great data that Joe was talking about earlier around testing and completions and those types of things. If you want that type of data, you would be reliant upon the customer, the partner who's delivering the content through their own LMS to provide that to you. Administrative burden, I think, really goes back into managing versions, sending out updates, things like that. And then the other bit, which is going back to the standards, is that if you're just handing over the package itself, you might have to create that content in multiple standards based on the customer's LMS or the partner's LMS. So you might have one course that you're distributing as a SCORM 1.2 package, but also, you know, a tin can package or a SCORM 2004 4th edition package based on the standard that that third-party LMS utilizes. So suffice to say, I would say that packaged content handing over in its entirety is the least desirable way to distribute your content, or the least efficient, not the best. Direct delivery is interesting because we have a lot of folks that come to us who have already built their content within a website or a web application. And they've done that for very specific reasons. They want to control that experience. The content is perhaps the type of experience or content that needs to be dynamically updated. They have a CMS attached to their web application where they're constantly updating the content, and it's reliant on a database or server-side code to update dynamically. Perhaps the learning experience that they're providing is not well suited for a packaged piece of content. Again, maybe it's relying on a database for dynamic updates or something to that effect. Perhaps you initially start developing your content through a website because your customers that you're starting to serve don't have an LMS themselves. And so they need to come to you to access the content because there's no other way for you to share that content with them. Some of the potential hazards around direct delivery or delivering your content through a web application as opposed to in a standards-based way is that you're going to need some technical help. Somebody's going to need to build the website for you and develop it, design it. Off the shelf, you don't have any LMS compatibility. Eventually, what we find is that folks that start building their content for direct delivery, the website, the web application, are fine for a little while, but as soon as that first big prospect or customer or partner comes to you and says, hey, we love your content, but we want to access it through our own LMS, you run into some challenges there. Proprietary data is also something that is somewhat challenging, but only if you have a customer or a partner who's wanting to consume learning data or activity data that you are tracking in a proprietary way within your website to pull that into a standards-based learning management system. That can be definitely a challenge in this particular distribution method. And then a lot of times you're kind of building your own reports. So that can be time consuming and challenging. One of the things that I'll mention as a travel tip here is that we talk to lots of content providers who are in this direct delivery space. When the time comes that you get asked for your content to be compatible with a standards-based application, an LMS, let's call it, our Rusticity cross-domain solution is a really interesting product of ours to consider. We can help you make your web-based content accessible through any standards-based third-party LMS. Okay, so the content marketplace. This is not something that we are providing as a solution, just to be clear. But if you're familiar with marketplaces like Open Sesame, Go1, I'm sure there are a variety of other marketplaces out there. This can be maybe not the only way that you distribute your content, but an additional way to make your content available to potential customers. So it's a great way for building a customer base beyond perhaps maybe the direct relationships that you already have in place. There's also a good bit of administrative work that you're offloading onto the marketplace itself. They're going to handle, the payment gateway, and they're going to handle, organizing the content in a way where people can find it for you. So there's some benefit to offloading some of the administrative work onto a marketplace. But there are also potential hazards. The first one is everybody wants to make money in most cases, especially if you're in the business of selling your content to customers. And marketplaces will take a cut of that. I mean, they're providing a valuable service, and they're going to expect some percentage of your revenue to come back to them. So slight reduction in margins, perhaps. Positioning is going to be something to consider within a marketplace. How do you get your content more visible to organizations that are working within that space? Perhaps you end up building direct relationships with the marketplace provider, and they have certain programs that help sort of elevate you or make you more visible within their system. But you're gonna run into this competition within the library of content that they're providing. And then pushing updates. You're gonna be reliant upon the marketplace. If you need to version your content, update your content, you're going to be reliant upon that marketplace to make sure that the old version gets swapped out with the new version. So it just has a layer of operational cost associated with that. Okay, so then our favorite. This is controlled centralized distribution. This is absolutely the way that we feel that most content providers should be going, both for content providers who are organizations that need to share their content either internally to multiple learning management systems or perhaps to partners. Think about extended enterprise use cases, but also to those content providers that are in the business of selling content, enabling you to centralize and control your content while making it accessible through third-party learning management systems can be pretty valuable. So providers or publishers that need to serve customers with their own learning system, their own LMS, their own LXP, centralized distribution is a great way to go because you don't hand over the content itself. You hand over an access file that happens to be a standards-based package that is compatible with whatever LMS they might be using. It's also a great solution for a content library that needs to be updated on a frequent basis. So if you think about your own content strategy, especially in the space where we find this most frequently is in the space of compliance, regulation-based content. This is high-stakes content, and you want to make sure that the end user is always getting the most up-to-date version. Centralizing that content in a centralization type tool for distribution means that you only ever have to update the content in one place. And then any application that has access to that content through the access file will automatically get that update. You also introduce an ability to protect your intellectual property. A lot of times when we're talking about content centralization and distribution, we're talking about standards-based content, that content that Joe is primarily talking about. And as I mentioned before, with packaged content distribution where you're just handing over the files themselves, you run the risk of people using the content outside of the scope of the agreement that you have with them, or perhaps handing it over to an organization that you don't even have a relationship with. So this is very much about protecting intellectual property, controlling access in that way. And then the thing that we get most excited about when it comes to centralization distribution is introducing a recurring revenue model. We love recurring revenue. It is how we've built our business, and we want our customers to experience the same benefit of establishing a recurring revenue model. When you're not handing over the content itself, when you control who can access it, how long they have access to it for, you can build subscription-based licensing, meaning that they have to have an active license and active subscription to be able to access your content. If they don't, they're going to have to come back to you, perhaps purchase another license, and now we're introducing this idea of ongoing recurring revenue. The pitfalls, the potential hazards on the other side, I don't think there are many, but a big one is an investment. You would be investing in an application that has the ability to centralize and control access and third-party distribution. So this does include some external costs, whereas if you were just handing over your SCORM packages to a third-party system, there's really no hard costs associated with that. There's no dollars that you're having to invest to do that. You're simply giving them the package. In this case, there's going to be an investment in the technology, but ideally the investment is worth it because of all of the benefits that it provides. A bit more uptime, extra time upfront. Although for our solutions, we try to make that super simple. You would actually work directly with Joe and some other folks on our team to get up and running rather quickly. But there is still some upfront time for getting familiar with the application. There's a little bit of a learning curve. There's a time investment to get up and running with a solution like this. For our solutions, I'll touch on a couple here in just a bit. We've got SCORM Cloud Dispatch and Content Controller of both content distribution kind of centralization tools that we offer here at Rust to see if I can help with that. So I mentioned a couple of products that help around distribution. The first one I'm going to touch on is one that Joe already mentioned when it comes to content testing. SCORM Cloud, many of you might be familiar with already. I tend to refer to SCORM Cloud like a Swiss Army knife. It is a single application that has lots of tools within it. Testing being a really important tool that Joe mentioned. But then there's the distribution side of things. We also tend to refer to SCORM Cloud as a training delivery platform. It is very much not a traditional learning management system, but it can be used to deliver your content to individual learners. So one aspect of SCORM Cloud that becomes interesting for some of our customers is the idea of invitations. With SCORM Cloud, if you have a course that you need to make easily available to individual learners, and you don't want them to have to go through the hassle of logging into an LMS, registering for a course, dealing with assignments, things like that, invitations is a super simple feature within SCORM Cloud that actually allows you to deliver content to individual users' email inboxes. It couldn't be easier. Or you can set up a public URL, a public invitation, and you can just post that link to any website or share that with any users that you need to, and they can self-register for the course directly through that invitation. We're then going to take care of playing the course in the browser, dealing with all of the things related to the standards that Joe was talking about earlier. We're going to then provide you with all of the necessary reporting that you would need off any interactions that you have with your content through the invitation side of SCORM Cloud. You also then have the third-party distribution option with SCORM Cloud. So another tool in the Swiss Army knife is Dispatch. Some folks might already be familiar with Dispatch. Dispatch is the content distribution solution within SCORM Cloud. So you would import your content into your SCORM Cloud account, and Dispatch is going to enable you to make that content accessible through any third-party LMS that supports SCORM or even LTI. This enables you to restrict access based on an expiration date. You can restrict access based on a registration cap. So the number of learners that can individually launch that content through the third-party LMS. And you start to introduce this idea of IP control, subscriptions, licenses, recurring revenue model. It can also be an interesting option for organizations that want to centralize their content in a cloud-based application because they need to distribute it into multiple learning systems within their organization. So you don't have copies of the content living everywhere, you just have a single copy in SCORM Cloud, makes updates a lot easier. And then you actually have a centralized reporting view of that content as well. And then the third area that SCORM Cloud helps with is if you want to build your own lightweight LMS. Maybe you just have a website that you want people to come to, but you have a library of standards-based packages. We can provide you with the required SCORM player or AICC support or XAPI or CMI5 support within that lightweight website that you might generate. It's basically bringing that LMS player into perhaps maybe a non-LMS type of system. And a lot of folks around the world use SCORM Cloud's API for that. All right, so the other option really is going to be focused on that last delivery method, which is centralization and distribution. Content Controller is an application that's now been around for almost 6+ years. It was a reimagining on our part of what a content distribution solution should do. It is primarily used for sharing content with third-party learning management systems, and it is best suited for content providers who sell and license their content. Again, we're going to help you with Content Controller around IP control, license management, automating access based on expiration dates and learner limits and things like that. We're going to help you with centralizing that content, so you end up having a single copy of the course within Content Controller, and making updates a lot easier. You version content directly within Content Controller. Any third-party LMS that has access to that particular course would automatically get those updates without you having to redistribute anything. So it makes that process incredibly efficient. Anybody who has taken the path of handing over their content to third-party LMSs will understand the amount of work and effort it takes to then update those courses in 20, 30, 50, 100 LMSs that your customers might be using. So that is a huge time saver for our customers. And then organizations tend to find value in Content Controller when they need to share their content with multiple learning management systems. Again, this could be inwardly facing. We have customers who are organizations that have multiple learning management systems within the business, and so they want to centralize content in that way to share that content across those various LMSs. But most of our customers that are organizations, we would refer to as like product type customers. So these are organizations who have a product that they're selling, and they need to train parts of their extended enterprise. So think about a tire manufacturer that needs to train Costco on how to sell their tires, provide maintenance on their tires, install their tires. Costco has their own LMS. This type of customer could store all of their content, their training content about their tires in something like Content Controller, make it accessible through the Costco LMS. So that extended enterprise use case is very applicable when it comes to this. I know I'm talking about these with words. Usually in most cases, we would dive into the application and show you, but for sake of time, we're not going to do that today. But what I'm hoping to do with sort of explaining some of these options to you is planting some seeds. And when those seeds sprout, when you have the idea that I need this particular type of solution, that is a great time to reach out to Joe or myself, and we can actually go into the applications and show you how it works and answer more questions that you might have. Okay, so we've got actually quite a bit of time left for questions. Joe, I don't know if you have seen any questions come in. I haven't been monitoring the chat or questions as I've been talking, but perhaps we've had some that have come in.
I think we've got some. Hold on one second. Let's see here. We've got a couple. Can a learner see the Big Four data or only us on the back end? That really depends on the context. If we're talking about a centralization and distribution situation, we can speak for SCORM Cloud Dispatch and Content Controller. In both of those situations, whatever the third-party LMS is going to expose to the learner, they're going to get. One of the great parts of both of these solutions is that we are going to try our best to send as much data to that third party as possible. So in reference to SCORM Cloud Dispatch, we're going to send, well, as Andy said, SCORM 1.2 and LTI are the standards that we're going to share out as. So we're going to do our best to send as much of that SCORM 1.2 data. And then, well, as of right now, I think as LTI 1.1 is supported. So they're just going to get a score. But if you were to share at SCORM 1.2, you would send the Big Four off to the third party, and then it would be on them to kind of decide what they show to the learner. Now, in reference to Content Controller, on the learner side of things, same thing, but I did want to kind of say that we aren't just limited to SCORM 1.2 or LTI. We do have other options as well. But once again, once that data is sent over to the third party, either via AICC, SCORM 2004, third or fourth edition, SCORM 1.2, or LTI 1.1 or 1.3, it would be on the LMS to show that to the learner.
And I'll just add to that, if you think about some other ways that SCORM Cloud specifically can distribute content, like via invitations, for example, the learner would see their results once they completed or exited the course. SCORM Cloud would present that kind of information to them on a results page. So in that case, then the learner would see that directly or immediately after they exit or complete the course via one of the invitations that we were mentioning. But in the vast majority of cases, it's going to be within the LMS where the learner would have access to that type of data.
We've got another, we had a question about Moodle. Does Moodle support SCORM 2004? I'm referring to Moodle version 3.9. It is my understanding that still natively Moodle only supports SCORM 1.2, but there are ways that you can, and we have seen people modify Moodle to support SCORM 2004, either via the SCORM Cloud API, like Andy talked about. We've had some folks implement our Rust SE engine within Moodle. And I think there may be other versions of Moodle. Maybe I'm going to speak out of school and say maybe I don't know a ton about Totara, but some of those flavors of Moodle might, but natively only SCORM 1.2.
Yeah, I'll just add on to that a little bit. What I've found in talking with a lot of potential customers and folks like that come to us, the easiest way, candidly, to make SCORM 2004 content available through Moodle is to use SCORM Cloud Dispatch. You can host your SCORM 2004 content within SCORM Cloud. You can create a SCORM 1.2 dispatch package for that content that is compatible with Moodle out of the box. And now you are making, the SCORM 2004 content directly available through your Moodle application without having to incur any developer time. It's all handled through the dispatch standards that we offer.
Nice one, Andy. Yeah. This is a good one. I'm looking to create a hybrid e-learning course survey for a coaching business. I could separate the content from the survey, but for the end users, having an integrated experience would be much nicer. They have a website, but no LMS or LRS at the moment. I can build an articulate and publish for the web, but how would I give the coaching business access to the survey data? What's your best advice? Andy, do you want to start on that one?
How about you start and I'll come back to it.
So the not having an LMS or LRS makes things a little tough. Because really, using a learning standard, one of the big things, aside from interoperability, the ability to pass the content to other systems, is tracking the learner's information. So you would need a means to do that. Now, without an LMS or LRS, that becomes a little bit difficult. Now, there are tools like Swarm Cloud that do make it easy, especially because you're using Articulate. Articulate does have the means to export as any of the flavors of SCORM, CMI5, Tin Can, AICC. So you would already have the means to create a piece of content that can communicate all of the data that you'd want to report on. But the rub is figuring out how to get that data to the coaching business. Aside from using Swarm Cloud or another training delivery system, you could possibly use something like a survey tool, like SurveyMonkey or something like that. That could be an option. But I think that would be my answer there.
Yeah, I think I would echo all of that, Joe.
Cool. I'm glad we're in agreement, Andy. A few times. Can the third party that you sell your course to via Swarm Cloud or Content Controller see and manage who from their school or company has completed the course? Is there a certification option built in?
I'll take this one, Joe.
Perfect.
Great. So the third party that you sell your course to will have access to all of their completion data within whatever LMS they're using. So Content Controller or Swarm Cloud Dispatch are going to be tools that you as the content provider would be utilizing. Think of them really as a back office type of solution. The idea here is that you're going to store your content centrally in either of these applications, and then the dispatching capability of either tool is going to make that accessible through whatever third-party LMS the customer might be using. So the data will initially be saved within Swarm Cloud or Content Controller so that you as the content owner have direct access to all of that data and can get all sorts of interesting insights out of that, see how your individual customers are utilizing the content. You might find that some customers aren't, so you might reach out to them to see if you can increase engagement. But behind the scenes, we're going to be automatically sharing that data back into the third-party LMS. There aren't any certification, like built-in certification engines within either solution. I think, Joe, correct me if I'm wrong, but a lot of folks that offer content that awards a certification usually are kind of building that certificate into the content itself. So when they pass that particular course, there might be a final page where the certificate is presented and downloaded. Or perhaps you might use the data that we're collecting for you in Content Controller or Swarm Cloud to push that into a separate application that is, managing certificates. Anything else that you've seen around certificates, Joe?
No, that's pretty much it. And the external applications, having it packed into the content, those are really the big two.
Yeah, and the LMS on the other side might also have some capabilities to award certifications, but obviously you would need to work pretty closely with the customer and their LMS admin to set those things up.
Very true. I have another one for you, Andy. Can you please clarify how Content Controller is different from Dispatch? And if so, what is the difference?
Yeah, so we actually have a page that will show a side-by-side comparison on rusticysoftware.com. If you were to Google or search on the website Swarm Cloud Dispatch versus Content Controller, it's going to give you a feature side-by-side comparison. But to kind of talk through that a bit, Swarm Cloud Dispatch was really the original application that we created around centralizing primarily standards-based content and making it accessible through third-party LMSs. As I mentioned, Content Controller is sort of a reimagining of that. It is built from the ground up to serve this particular use case. It's really all that Content Controller does. So it's mostly going to be, the differences are going to be around the breadth of features within Content Controller. You're rarely going to run into a case using Content Controller that we won't have a solution already built into the application to support, whereas there's going to be more limited features within Swarm Cloud Dispatch, because candidly, Dispatch is one of several tools that exist within SCORM Cloud. So it's not the only thing that SCORM Cloud is helping with. So the feature set tends to be a little bit less. Happy to do side-by-sides on those types of things. If you're interested in actually opening up both applications, I can go in and really show you the specific differences between the two, but it's really going to be more about you know, a wider set of functionality within Content Controller, a more limited set of functionality within SCORM Cloud. SCORM Cloud is still a great option for dispatch, and in cases where you have a relatively small user population, a reasonably sized content library, SCORM Cloud dispatch can be a very, very economical way to get started with sharing content with third-party systems. Content Controller tends to be more of an enterprise type solution. So large libraries, large user populations, Content Controller tends to be a better fit there.
And we have the side-by-side that Andy was talking about in the chat, if you want to have a look.
Oh, great. That's awesome.
And Andy, you're still on the hot seat. Got another one for you. Are there significant cost differentials between SCORM Cloud Dispatch and Content Controller? Asking as a company that licenses our training to companies with 1,000 to hundreds of thousands of learners, without transferring too much cost to clients, I'm curious which might be the most cost-efficient option based on our use case.
Right. So it really is going to come down to the user population that you're expecting to support through a distribution solution like either SCORM Cloud Dispatch or Content Controller. We find typically that when you start getting into tens of thousands of individual learners that need to access your content through a third-party application over the span of, let's say, a 12-month period of time, Content Controller starts to become a more economical option for you, especially if you couple a larger learner population with a sizable content library. SCORM Cloud pricing is based on the number of registrations that are created each month. On our pricing page, you can kind of get a sense of what registrations are, but essentially they're a record of a learner launching a specific piece of content. And so when you start thinking about rather large learner populations and lots of usage of a rather large library, we can be creating lots and lots of registrations within SCORM Cloud when we have that type of scenario. So at a high level, you're really typically looking at one solution over the other based on learner population, based on size of the content library. If you have hundreds of thousands of learners, I would not recommend using SCORM Cloud in that use case. Content Controller would be the better option. If you have less than 10,000 users that might access your content over the course of a 12-month period of time, SCORM Cloud might be a more economical option for you. And the pricing is quite flexible because it's on a month-to-month basis. That's the other side of things. Content Controller tends to be a longer-term commitment. These are annual licenses that we have for that application, where SCORM Cloud is a month-to-month type of subscription. Use it for a bit, and if you decide this isn't what I want to do with my content business, just stop using SCORM Cloud and we'll stop charging you for it.
Good one. So I'll take this next one. Using Dispatch to host a SCORM 2004 course for distribution in a SCORM 1.2 LMS. How does that work when the course expects to store up to 64,000 characters in the suspend data field, and Moodle cuts you off at 4,000? So great question. And so first off, for those of you who don't go too far into the SCORMy weeds, there is a concept of suspend data, and the suspend data bucket is a place for a piece of content to put its stuff. It can put whatever it wants in there, as long as it stays within the confines or the limits of each of the standards. So SCORM 1.2 has a limit of 4,096 characters. And if your course leans on suspend data a bunch, which it's totally cool to do because it's, once again, it's a place for its stuff, then if you hit the limit, you could run into some problems. Now, SCORM 2004 3rd and 4th edition did extend that limit to 64,000 characters. So you've got a lot more room. So what happens in both the SCORM Cloud Dispatch and Content Controller is on launch, when Moodle launches that SCORM 1.2 course, it is going to reach out to Content Controller, which is playing the SCORM 2004 course. So all of the SCORM 2004 type stuff is happening on Content Controller. The only thing in Suspend we're going to be sharing with the 1.2 LMS is really the what we'll call a dispatch registration ID, which is basically just a kind of a pointer that we store there. So you won't be in any danger of storing a ton of information in your Moodle 1.2 LMS as far as Suspend data is concerned. All the rest of the stuff they'll get, but since there are technically two players in the playing here, their player reaching out to us, we handle the 64,000 character side of things. They can continue to handle 4,096.
Yeah, and all of that would be applicable for SCORM Cloud Dispatch as well as Content Control.
So what is the best way to create a learning path for users since the customer is responsible for uploading on their own LMS? Great question. So in both SCORM Cloud Dispatch and Content Controller, you are uploading individual pieces of content or media files. So from our point of view, we don't really have a way to create a learning path that is going to flow through to the third party at this point. You could get around this by creating, if you're using SCORM or AICC, multi-SCO or multi-AU courses and importing them directly into Cloud in Content Controller. But that does kind of put you on the hook to know how to do that thing. As some of you may know, creating multi-SCO SCORM content, specifically SCORM 2004, can be a little squirrely. But once again, we're happy to help people with that. But as far as learning paths in the future, I am not sure when and if that would ever be added to Content Controller. I know we've passed it around some, but I would definitely pay attention to the Content Controller section of our support portal. We're constantly updating all of the release notes for when we release new versions of Content Controller. I keep an eye on that, maybe follow that page. And if it does pop in the future, it'll definitely be in those notes there. Andy, do you have anything to add?
No, I think the challenge there is that we found over the years that LMSs tend to structure things in their own sort of particular way. So in some cases, it's difficult to productize the concept of a learning path within a solution that we provide because different LMSs might handle that in different ways. And other than something like Common Cartridge, which tends to show up mostly in higher ed LMSs, to my knowledge, there's really not a standard that is being adopted by a learning management system to make that a little bit more straightforward. So a lot of that is just going to be human intervention, working with the customer or the partner to make sure that they're organizing your content within their LMS in a specific way, and that just might be a document that you put in front of them as a guide. I know we've only got about 2 minutes left. Joe, do we want to take a crack at this last one, and then maybe we'll wrap it up for today?
Let's do this one. Also, I feel like we missed a key theming element. We could have said we're sitting around the campfire after the hike. I have to say that.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, I failed. We could be eating s'mores and talking about SCORM.
I love it.
Because who wouldn't want to do that?
Exactly. Who would love this?
We have another great question. Are registration numbers in the cloud account based only on when the enrollment is made, or is it counted by open enrollments each month? So we can talk about this in two different ways here. As far as invitations are concerned, there are two types of invitations in SCORM Cloud, a private invitation and a public invitation. A private invitation, you are explicitly inviting someone to take a piece of content. And in that case, you are dinged a registration immediately because you are saying, Andy Whitaker is taking this workplace harassment course. He is going to do it. We're going to go ahead and charge you for it. For public invitations, that's all that is doing is creating a link that you can post somewhere, and then your learners will click on the link, put their name, their email address in there, and at that point, once they hit play, they're going to be charged for a registration. Now, dispatch is a little bit different, but it really echoes more of the public invitation, because we aren't going to know that someone has launched it until they launch it. So in the Swarm Cloud dispatch scenario, they will be you'll be dinged a registration when they launch the course through that third-party LMS. I think that's what we were getting at there.
Yeah, that's great.
Anything to add, Andy?
I don't think so. Yeah, the only thing to add, I think, is if you jump down to that next slide, Joe, we'll kind of wrap it up here now that we're at the top of the hour. You know, we have always positioned ourselves here at Rustici Software as a place where you can come to get your e-learning standards and other related questions answered, and we absolutely mean ask us anything, really. And we love talking to folks about these things. There's going to be a quick survey that'll show up after we shut down the webinar. If you're interested in having a further conversation with either Joe or myself, just simply answer yes to the survey, and we'll follow up with you to schedule some one-on-one time. And you know, that gives us an opportunity to really get into the details of your use case and talk more specifically about ways that we might be able to help. But I know, Joe, I'll speak for Joe, we're really grateful for everyone who joined today and stuck around for the full hour of our hike and campfire time. But I hope everyone has a great rest of your day, and hopefully we'll talk as we get a little bit further down the trail.
Thanks, Al.
All right, take care.